I lived in the Falkland Islands for 2 months. It's a tiny, remote British overseas territory in the South Atlantic. With no natural trees, 8 pubs, and 1 million penguins. Although I went for work, secretly I had one true goal: to capture footage of all 5 of the island's breeding penguin species. While some are ubiquitous, the Falkland Islands is home to the largest population of gentoos on Earth, others are more challenging to find, requiring overland travel. Some are accessible only by plane, or boat, I guess, and one is so elusive that there are only a few hundred breeding pairs on the entire island. I got a tip yesterday, so I've got to get out there quickly before it disappears. And come March, they're completely gone for the season. And I arrived in February. So with no time to spare, I traveled across the entire archipelago, visiting camp communities, offshore islands, hiking mountains. Welcome to the highest peak in the island. Okay, that one was just for fun. I didn't actually expect to find any penguins up there. And even staying overnight in a portakabin almost 200 kilometers from the nearest civilization. But would I find all 5 penguins? Or would I get lost on a remote island in the South Atlantic with no one around to hear me scream? Well, one thing was for sure. My quest would take me places I never could have imagined. So if you're looking for a comprehensive guide on how to travel the Falklands, sprinkled with a little humor,
that was a full-on fish, I think,
and a little storytelling, buckle in. This is a wild one. My search for penguins started at the Mount Pleasant Airport, an RAF military complex about 45 minutes from Stanley. You won't see footage here because cameras are not allowed on the base, and I didn't feel like getting shot. Upon settling in to what would be my home for the next 8 weeks, my landlord told me that the best place to see penguins close to Stanley is Yorke Point. Walking distance. Or not, as I eventually found out. Before we take off on our penguin escapades though, you've got to check out Stanley. It's where it all starts. It was a sleepy little town, and it certainly had that unmistakable UK flair. It was definitely walkable in a day, but I really felt like I'd need my entire 8 weeks to dig in and explore deeper. My intentions were always to explore the Falklands' nature, but the island's rich and tumultuous history was ever present. Summarizing 400 years of colonization, agricultural feats, war and diplomatic relations and modernization is no easy task, but I found the tiny Harborside Museum had an incredible array of artifacts and exhibits from as far back as the 1800s. Within the first day, I noticed something very peculiar and awesome. 4x4s, and not just 4x4s, Land Rovers. Almost every single vehicle on the road was a Land Rover. Personal Land Rovers, government Land Rovers, and even the taxis, all Land Rovers. It made sense though. Out of 3,600 people in the Falklands, 3,400 live either in Stanley or on the base, leaving around 12,000 square kilometers pretty empty and underdeveloped. Who needs roads when you've got a diesel engine and low gear? Here's something else I learned. There are no trees in the Falklands. That's right, none. Well, okay, there are a few, but those have all been planted by people, and every piece of timber used in construction has been imported. Commercial fishing accounts for about 50% of the Falklands economy, and the harbor was often full of old and dirty squid jigger ships, mostly from Taiwan, Spain, and the Philippines. Apparently, some of these vessels spend up to 18 months at sea, and the cruise showers are saltwater. I learned that tourism and wool export make up the majority of the rest of the economy. Currency was the Falkland Island pound, which is pegged to the British pound. The 50-pence coins have many iterations, all depicting various local animals, including penguins! Since I arrived in February, I caught the tail end of high season, which runs from October to March. It's the warmest time of year and the best time to see animals. At the top of Dairy Paddock Road, I found a whalebone display. I'd been told about this before my trip, but wasn't really sure what to expect. The bones have all been collected and curated by the property owner Mike. He was super friendly and loves to talk. He's got a pet sheep too. As I walked by a local pub called the Rose Tavern, I found a gnome garden. You heard me right. Apparently one of the locals has taken it upon herself to find every Smurf-looking ornament in the South Atlantic and has laid them all out on her front lawn. Finally, I took a walk along the boardwalk. And although my plans would soon take me across the entire archipelago, I realized you don't need to go far to see the most incredible animals.
This is the black oyster catcher.
Sorry, BBC isn't paying me for this one. They are the rarer of the two types of oyster catchers and easily blend into the rocky shoreline. Notice those long legs and bright red bill? Perfectly suited for feeding along the intertidal zones. I watched them for hours. Here, one wades into the water in search of a snack. He spots a mussel and goes for it. That part was easy. Now, he must use his specially designed bill to pry it open and extract the fleshy meal inside. The first bite was for him, but this one is for his mate. How thoughtful. It looks like she appreciated it. As the sun set after my first few days in the Falklands, I felt energized. I had a fire under me. So I plotted a hiking route that would take me to Yorke Point, with a couple stops along the way. It was time to find some penguins. Okay, so my ill-researched and poorly planned adventure was as follows. Walk from Stanley to Gypsie Cove, which would take me past Lady Elizabeth. Then follow the beach to Yorke Bay. And finally, make my way up the peninsula to Cape Pembroke. All in all, my route was just over 30 kilometers round trip. But I didn't know that yet. There was a boardwalk for some of it, but mostly I just walked straight towards my destination. No trees, remember? So it was pretty easy going. These are the more common pied oyster catchers. And this is a kelp goose. About another 20 feet up the shore, I found a family of flightless steamer ducks, which are endemic to the Falkland Islands. These guys are one of the heaviest ducks in the world, and as the name implies, they can't fly. Instead, they use their hilariously small wings to burn across the water like a psychotic paddle wheeler. As I passed over Boxer's Bridge, I found an old, sunken boat cemetery. Not too far past that was the shipwreck Lady Elizabeth. Over 100 years ago, while sailing from Vancouver to Mozambique, it was damaged in a storm and it had to divert course to Stanley for repairs. Unfortunately, it ran aground on arrival, damaging it beyond repair. It sat condemned until 1936 when its mooring broke and it drifted into Whalebone Cove, where it now sits. Considering how much of Stanley's history relied on seafaring, it's honestly such a statement that this gigantic ship is visible from town. About 6.5 kilometers later, I finally found Gypsie Cove. It's a secluded, tiny, crescent-shaped beach with rocky outcroppings that shelter it from the wind. Because of this, it's a great place to go birdwatching and is a really popular tourist spot. I had the place to myself, but unfortunately the beach is permanently fenced off, so I was stuck watching things from afar. I didn't mind though, because penguins! My first species knocked off the list already. I couldn't believe how close to Stanley they were. I'm from Canada, so when I think of penguins, I think of like the South Pole. Well, actually, I think of pengu. But then I think of snow and ice in Antarctica, not sandy beaches and walking distance from a coffee shop. Anyway, okay, so these are called Magellanic penguins. They have a really unique black and white band on their head, and they're the only Falkland penguins that nest in burrows. Because of this, they're often found on hillsides where there's soft peat soil. They are the shyest little guys on the island too, and will scoot into their burrows or out to sea if disturbed. They're also called Jackass penguins because, well... But we don't call them that anymore because it's 2025, people. I then continued on my journey to Yorke Point.
You have to be careful when you take this route because there is some quicksand between Gypsie Cove and Yorke Point, and you don't want to get caught in it.
There were eerie warning signs scattered around, but because of the route I took, I'd been hiking through the danger zone for about 20 minutes before I saw them. Just last year, firefighters had to rescue a hiker who got stuck. And as if that wasn't enough, the area also used to be a minefield. During the Falkland War, hundreds of landmines were buried along Yorke Bay. The unexploded ordnance were never removed, so the bay was fenced and strictly off limits for almost 40 years, until finally, after a huge community effort, they were removed and the island was declared free of landmines in 2020. Nevertheless, I spent the next 45 minutes slowly putting one foot in front of the other, sticking to small mounds and areas that had shrubs, expecting that at any moment I'd either get swallowed up by the sand or blown to smithereens. I later learned that it had been a dry summer and there was actually no quicksand at all. And of course, the landmines really were gone.
Yay. Yorke Point is probably the closest place to Stanley where you can see penguins. It's mostly Gentoos, but there are some Magellanic penguins and occasionally some kings as well. I think I see some penguins.
At first, I thought they were all Magellanics, but I quickly realized I had just walked into a massive colony of Gentoos. The Falklands has more than 100,000 breeding pairs, which is more than anywhere else in the world, and they can be found year-round, so you'll see them regardless of when you choose to visit. They have a beautiful orange bill and bright orange feet. I found these guys to have the most personality of all the species too. And they were certainly the most curious. You'll see them do what's called a chick chase, where the young must chase their parents in order to get fed. Apparently, it helps them build strength.
Look at them playing. I'm gonna try and make it all the way to Cape Pembroke, which is the most eastern part of the island.
It's very exposed, so wear something warm if you plan on exploring. The road out is actually part of a weekly 5-kilometer park run, where every Saturday locals race from the airport to the lighthouse and back. The 18-meter-tall lighthouse was built in 1855 and actually used to burn sea lion oil to illuminate the beacon. Once I arrived, I took the time to walk around the shoreline. I saw tons of birds, including a Falkland thrush, some Arctic terns, and a turkey vulture. Around the far side, I spotted something big in the grass. I cautiously got a little closer and found a sea lion. These guys are a terrifying cross between a walrus, a grizzly bear, and a lion.
Oh my goodness.
The massive head and mane show you exactly where the name comes from. They're quicker than you think too, so just like all animals in the Falklands, keep your distance. With most of Stanley explored, I was going to have to start branching out further if I had any chance of finding all 5 penguin species. I got a tip that the best place for sure to see king penguins was called Volunteer Point. It's a privately owned nature reserve on Johnson's Harbour Farm in the northeast Falklands. You'll have to hire a 4x4 and get permission prior to visiting, but honestly, that's the only way you'll ever find it anyways. Most of the journey is overland, meaning there's no signs or waymarkers. There's not even a road. If you want to really flex on your friends, you can take a freaking helicopter. But to be honest, 4x4ing is more my style. When we got to the farm, I immediately took off in search of the largest Falkland penguin species. I followed a couple Gentoos to the west beach and stumbled upon another colony. When I said these guys have personality, I meant it. A few curious ones came right up to me, like so close my camera wouldn't focus. So I actually just put it down and enjoyed the moment. I could see them breathing, the ruffle of their feathers, and even their third eyelid blinking. After spending some quality time with the Gentoos, I followed the droning sound up the hill towards where the king penguin colony supposedly was. I knew I was headed the right direction when I spotted this guy walking the same way. These are the big guys, king penguins. The second largest penguin in the world. The largest penguin in the world is the emperor penguin, so don't be getting the names wrong, okay? It's a sore spot for them. Now, not only are they huge, but this right here is the largest breeding group in the entire world, at 1,500 strong. Like other penguins, they are excellent swimmers and feed on fish and squid. So you can understand why I was so confused when these guys looked timid?
Run away! Run away! Run away!
Like, was the water too cold or something? I also saw this Gentoo running out of the water. And then I saw it. Sea lions are a major predator, and this guy looked hungry. Don't worry, penguin was not on the menu today. Probably one of the coolest things about the king penguins is that the breeding cycle is over a year long, so you can see the entire life cycle right in front of your eyes. The commanding presence of the adults with their majestic yellow necks and silver coats, the super awkward teenagers as they molt, the even younger fuzzy ones, and the eggs. Apparently, the penguins rest on their heels to keep their toes warm. Did I miss anything? Oh yeah, the chicks! And with that, my third species was knocked off the list. After about 2 hours of filming, I was freezing. Thankfully, there was a little shed with tea and biscuits to warm up. Inside, I found some preserved penguin eggs. The largest is a king penguin. The next is a Gentoo. And the third? Comment below if you know. I could hardly contain my excitement. To see this fourth and smaller egg-laying penguin, I'd have to venture even further.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sea Lion Island Day 2. Yesterday, I explored the east side of the island. I went all the way down and saw some elephant seals, and then jumped across to North Beach and saw some penguins, some Gentoos, some Magellanics, saw a ton of different bird species. I saw one sea lion. Woke up bright and early so that I can explore the rest of the island today. So today I'm finally getting the opportunity to go to Sea Lion Island. Sea Lion Island is south of East Falkland, and it's operated as a tourist destination. There's only one settlement to stay at there, but it is fully catered. This island is supposed to be super cool. It's the most important breeding spot in all of the Falklands for elephant seals. Right now, I've heard that there's a colony of about 20 that have hauled out there, but I think probably one of the coolest things about this place is it's a really important bird area. So there's a whole bunch of different bird species, including the Rockhopper penguin and hopefully a Macaroni penguin. Those are the two that I haven't seen yet, and I'm really hoping to knock them off my bucket list. I'm going for one night, traveling via FIGAS, and I'm only allowed 14 kilograms of luggage, and that's basically just my camera gear. So one night on the island, and hopefully a ton of stuff to see. Let's go. Alright, so I have just landed on Sea Lion Island. It is 3:30 right now and dinner is at 6 o'clock. So I have 2.5 hours to explore as much of this island as possible, because the way that it works with the FIGAS flights is you have no idea when you're getting out of here. So I know I'm leaving tomorrow, but it could be at 9 a.m. or it could be as late as 7 p.m. Obviously, I'm hoping for a later flight, but who knows?
With very limited daylight, I thought I'd spend the evening exploring the East End. It's a small island, so I figured if I budgeted my time right, I could circumnavigate the whole thing in 2 days. Well, if you know tussock grass, then you're probably laughing to yourself. Anyway, first up, Elephant Corner. Then across North Beach, up to Cow Point, then back to the settlement for dinner. These are southern elephant seals, the largest pinnipeds in the world. The males can weigh up to 8,000 pounds and measure up to 20 feet long. If I knew any better, I'd say Jabba the Hutt was based on these guys. Their blubber is up to 6 inches thick, accounting for 50% of their body weight. Essentially, they are blobs. In fact, you have to be careful you don't mistake them for a rock, because they could definitely hurt you if you got too close. Just listen to their growls. Also, fun fact, they use their flippers to throw sand on themselves to protect their skin from the sun. The walk across to North Beach was unexpectedly terrifying. I didn't believe it until I saw it. But these massive units make a habit of hauling themselves up the shore into the tussock grass. Occasionally, sea lions will do this too, so be careful, or as AJ would say, "Don't go into the long grass!" As usual, the penguins led the way. As I walked past another massive Gentoo colony, I saw some two-banded plovers, a Johnny Rook, we'll talk about these guys soon, and some upland geese. Unlike the Canadian hissing cobra chickens, these guys are quite tame. You'll find them pretty much anywhere in the Falklands. Believe it or not, some people actually eat them. The male is white, while the female is reddish-brown with yellow legs. As the sun set with the settlement just over the next hill, I lucked out and found a penguin highway. A penguin highway is a well-trodden path that connects the rookery to the sea. And I stumbled upon it just as they were all coming home for the evening, their bellies full of fish and squid that they'd gathered that day. With penguin spotting going so well, now is a good time to tell you about a major problem with my search for all 5 penguin species. And that's the last species on my list. See, I knew when I arrived on the island that finding the first 4 penguins would be pretty straightforward. But my real mission was to find that 5th one. It's a penguin so elusive and rare that most Falkland Islanders can go all year without seeing it. It's called the Macaroni. Currently, there are a couple dozen pairs on the entire island, and the numbers have declined in recent years due to climate change and commercial fishing. The Falkland Islands are also the extreme northern limit of this species' range, and they all depart in April. So my extremely tiny window was already closing, and fast. And because finding one of these 50 penguins amongst millions wasn't enough of a challenge, the Macaronis also live and breed with Rockhopper penguins, with hybrid species known to occur, making my pursuit of the Macaroni similar to a Where's Waldo book, but with a bunch of Wendas and Wilmas tossed in to completely throw me off the scent.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sea Lion Island Day 2. And today, I'm going to explore the west side of the island. Now, the west side of the island is a lot bigger than the east side of the island, and so my goal today is to not only see the rockhoppers, but also to hopefully see some more sea lions. If I'm lucky, hopefully a macaroni. But let's get started and let's go see what we can find.
This is the black-throated finch. It's a ground bird and makes its nests amongst ground vegetation. I was lucky enough to also stumble upon a Magellanic snipe. They are very secretive and easily overlooked because they have excellent camouflage and remain still in response to danger. That long bill is perfectly suited for plucking earthworms and grubs from the ground. The Falkland Islands is home to over 220 bird species, including 3 that are endemic, found nowhere else in the world. The first is the tussock bird. It will follow you and even perch on your foot if you're still enough. Second is the Falkland steamer duck, which we already saw. And finally, third is the Cobb's wren, about the size of a ping pong ball and extremely curious. But unfortunately, this guy and all the other birds we just saw are at serious risk because of a small, fuzzy, tenacious island invader. Rats. Rats are not native to the island and were accidentally introduced when ships from early settlers arrived in the 18th century. They are prolific breeders, with females producing up to 5 litters per year, and they eat everything, including nesting birds and their eggs. I even had one in my sleeping quarters on Saunders Island. Islands on which rats are present have fewer than half the number of birds, and those 2 endemic species, the Cobb's wren and the tussock bird, are completely absent on these islands. Over the past 25 years, eradication efforts have successfully removed rats from almost 70 islands. Another 26 were also cleared, but within only 5 years were re-invaded. See, it turns out that these rats can swim up to almost a kilometer offshore. The good news is that with continued efforts and newer technology, the prospects of eradication are promising. So these guys can be allowed to thrive once again. As I continued on, I spotted some Johnny Rooks curiously looking down at the water. It seemed they were watching the sea lions play in the surf. Spotting the sea lions meant I'd made it to the cliffs on the south side of the island and was already halfway to my final destination, Rockhopper Point, where I would hopefully spot that elusive macaroni. This is about the point where I became very familiar with tussock grass. It is pervasive in the Falklands, with huge swaths of it growing up to 3 meters tall. It's the single most important wildlife habitat on the entire island, and while it also aids in slope stabilization and erosion control, it is completely impassable. If you stick to the engineered trail, you'll be fine, but all my gallivanting around got me lost in a tussock maze, slowing me down significantly. Thankfully, the drone of shorebirds let me know I had finally made it. These are king cormorants. They breed in massive colonies on cliff tops, feeding on fish and crustaceans in the shallow waters below. You can find them year-round in the Falklands, and they're different than rock cormorants, which you'll find in smaller colonies closer to town. You can easily tell these two apart though. The rock cormorants have a distinctive red patch around their eyes, whereas the king cormorants have this weird fleshy growth called a carbuncle on their bills. Apparently, it's used to attract mates. Conveniently, these same cliffs are also home to the Rockhopper penguin colony. These little guys are the smallest of the Falkland penguins, weighing around 4 kilograms or 9 pounds. Turns out they are very aptly named. They literally hop along the rocks. Of course, if you rock hop, at some point, eventually, you'll rock fall. They are just about finished molting, will soon head out for sea, and won't return until breeding season in October. If you want to see the chicks, eggs are laid in November and hatch in early December. They have no fear of people either, and as long as you move slowly and quietly and don't try and enter the colony, they will just carry on with business as usual. Notice their blood-red eyes and that distinctive yellow crest? It doesn't develop until maturity. In the water, sea lions are their biggest predator, but the eggs and young chicks are often stolen by skuas and Johnny Rooks. Thankfully, the fledglings are a little too heavy for old Johnny Boy now. There used to be about 1 million rockhopper penguins in the Falklands, but unfortunately a combination of commercial fishing and a harmful algae bloom in the 90s and early 2000s decimated the population. The Falklands is still home to 1/3 of the global population though, at around 300,000 pairs. I hung out at the cliffs for a few hours, but unfortunately the macaroni remained elusive. Despite this, I was feeling rather confident. I still had a few places to knock off the bucket list, and with lots of shoreline left to explore, there would be plenty of opportunity to catch a glimpse. Sea Lion Island is a must-visit. It's the only island that is fully catered and offers almost a retreat-like experience. It's a small settlement though, with a finite number of rooms, so you'll also never have to worry about hordes of tourists. There were 6 other people when I was there. The trails are well maintained and marked, the hiking is easy as it's all relatively flat, and the island can be circumnavigated in a day. And there are a ton of species to see. Overall, Sea Lion Island offers just about the easiest access in the Falklands to a variety of incredible wildlife you won't see anywhere else in the world. With Sea Lion Island knocked off the bucket list, I wanted to start exploring the Western Territory, so I rounded up some work friends, a local with a 4x4 vehicle, and convinced them to spend their weekend inland towards the Falkland Sound. This next adventure was by far the most unique of my entire trip. Get ready for Goose Green and Mount Usborne.
Goose Green is kind of in the middle of East Falkland with Lafonia just south of it. It's about 90 kilometers or a 2-hour drive from Stanley itself, but you can also fly there if you wanted to. So Goose Green is actually the largest sheep farm on East Falkland. It's got about 100,000 sheep according to what I was reading, and it's about 2 kilometers just south of a place called Darwin. So Darwin was the original settlement in that area. Most of those buildings are moved, but you can stay at a place called Darwin House if you wanted to spend a couple nights there. Rumor has it that Charles Darwin, when he was on his expedition, actually stayed there. The other thing that's great about Darwin and Goose Green is that it's the perfect base to start a hike to Mount Usborne, which is what we're doing on Sunday. Mount Usborne is the tallest peak in the Falklands, albeit it's only about 705 meters, but it should be a great view as long as the weather holds out. And then just south of Goose Green is a place called Bodie Bridge, which is the most southern suspension bridge in the world, and I'm hoping to check that out as well. On the way to Goose Green, we're going to stop at a place called Bertha's Beach. Bertha's Beach is apparently one of the best places in the Falklands to see some wildlife.
Bertha's Beach is part of the Fitzroy sheep farm and only about 10 kilometers from the Mount Pleasant complex. There is a locked gate, and unless you're military, you'll need permission from the landowner to enter. If you've got a vehicle, it's worth the trip from Stanley. Recognized as a wetland site of international importance, Bertha's Beach has an incredible number of bird species, including the black-necked swans, which are pretty rare to see and quite skittish. We started out walking north along the beach and eventually spotted some gentoos. These curious little guys spotted us too and had to run over to check things out. We even caught a glimpse of a peel dolphin and sea lion playing in the surf.
Oh, dolphin, yeah. Oh! What?
Here's that again in slow motion. Since we'd reached the end of the beach, we turned around and walked south all the way to Fox Point. These are tea berries. They grow on tiny shrubs that creep along the ground. They are deliciously sweet, but very tedious to pick up. Unfortunately, it was a bit too windy for bird sightings today, so we packed up and headed on to Goose Green. Goose Green is a tranquil little town, scattered with old buildings, sheep fences, and military artifacts, which provide clues to the bustling settlement it once was. Goose Green was originally a tallow factory established in 1875, and at that time it was inhabited by 13 people. Its population grew to over 200 people in 1920 when Darwin, just 3 kilometers away, outgrew its site. The entire Darwin farm, buildings, houses, and church were transported on sleds to Goose Green, where they now sit. In 2025, although it remains the largest farm in the Falklands at 430,000 acres, its single shop, restaurant, and small airfield are just a fragment of what it once was. Despite this, Goose Green is now an ideal base for tourists and adventurers looking to explore Lafonia and the eastern shores. Or, in our case, to hike Mount Usborne. We got up bright and early the next morning with the goal of summiting the 705-meter peak. After getting permission from the landowner, we hopped in the 4x4 and drove out to the foothills. We stuck to a couple faint tracks to avoid damaging the vegetation, but once we set out on foot, we had nothing but the mountain peak to guide us. Apparently, hikers have gotten stuck on this mountainside in the past because when fog rolls in, it's impossible to find your way down. For us, however, the weather looked clear, at least for now. There were several large stone runs, which was slow going, but eventually we made it.
I went down that road again. I went down that road. I went down that road again. I went down. Welcome to the highest peak in the islands. We made it. The weather held out. It's extremely windy and very cold up here, but there's not a whole lot of cloud coverage. You can see Goose Green just over the hill that way, and you can almost see to Stanley in this direction. So now we got to make the big hike back down, but overall, great success today. Really great climb. I went down that road again. I went down that road. I went down that road again. I went down. No way, we're here already?
There you go.
Whoa. Because that's what happens when you take the right
I
route.
don't know, shall we all 2 minutes?
Thankfully, we didn't lose our way and made it back to civilization by early evening. Although one thing about the Falklands, despite the vast expanses of land, you're never really alone. In fact, I bet at any given time, you're no more than a kilometer away from a sheep. With a successful summit under our belt, it was time to head home, but not before checking out the infamous Bodie's Creek Suspension Bridge, only 15 minutes by Land Rover south of Goose Green. It was built in 1924 to provide sheep farmers a shorter route from Walker Creek to Goose Green, and by my estimate, it would have shaved off about 16 kilometers. At that time, it was considered the most southerly suspension bridge in the world. It's 400 feet long, 8 feet wide, has two 40-foot towers, and was built essentially by hand. Unfortunately, it was closed to vehicles and pedestrians in 1977, and since then has been slowly rusting away. In 2000, it was immortalized on a stamp. But without restoration, it won't be long before this piece of history ends up in the creek. And with that, our weekend adventure was complete.
The macaronis are here.
Macaronis are here.
Someone literally just wrote this month that they spotted a macaroni in the colony of... Welcome to the neck. I'm in a tiny portakabin on the west portion of Saunders Island right now. I flew in last night and got here just before dark, so unfortunately didn't get a chance to explore yesterday, but I did get some great shots of the sunset.
Saunders Island is a stunningly tranquil, privately owned island tucked in the northwest corner of the Falklands. Like almost every adventure in the Falklands, my trip started with a FIGAS flight. This time, across the entire island, over the Falkland Sound to the western coastline. The entire population of Saunders consists of a few people on one farm. I pre-arranged the trip, so when I landed, the owner David took me 45 minutes overland to the Neck, a tiny isthmus that connects Mount Marston to the rest of the island. Make sure to stock up on food at their makeshift store or bring your own, because once you set out, there's absolutely nothing. There are 3 different accommodations on Saunders Island. You can also stay at the Rookery, or if you're in a bigger group, at the R&R house next to the farm. At the Neck, there's a retrofitted portakabin from the Falklands War, and it would be my home for the next 2 nights. It fits up to 4 people, so sometimes there will be other campers, and sometimes, like in my case, you're the only one.
The Falkland Islands has the largest population of black-browed albatross in the world, and Saunders Island is actually one of the major breeding sites. This is one of the most accessible places to see albatross in all of the Falklands. I suppose that's kind of a relative thing because I'm in the middle of nowhere right now.
Can we just take a second to recognize how in the middle of nowhere I meant? I was alone, on a tiny island, in an archipelago where very few people live, in the South Atlantic, over 400 kilometers from the nearest continent. Anyway.
But the idea is that it's just a short walk that way. Also, I'm still very much looking for the elusive Macaroni penguin. The Macaroni penguins look very similar to the Rockhopper penguins, but there's a few things that gives them away. The Macaroni penguins are bigger. They also have a bigger, sort of heavier bill. And then the other piece is that the Rockhopper penguins have a bright yellow tuft that starts over their eyebrows and sweeps back, whereas the Macaroni penguins have more of a golden orange tuft that starts over their forehead. And apparently there's only around 300 pairs of Macaroni penguins on the island. I'm really hoping that I'm able to find one, but at this point, I don't know, I'm a little skeptical. So this morning I've got huge plans. Number one is I'm gonna turn on the generator so that I don't run out of electricity here. And then after that, I'm gonna walk all the way to Elephant Point, which is about an 18 to 20 kilometer round trip. At Elephant Point, obviously you can see elephant seals, but they also have the southern giant petrel there. And they're not very common around Stanley, so this might be one of my last chances to actually catch those birds. Then I'm gonna take a short hike west. I'm gonna walk to the Rockhopper colony, and then just past that is the Albatross colony. It is 8:30 right now, and the days are short, so here we go.
The island is like a mini version of the Falklands packed into one. Outside my front door, I found king penguins. Thousands of Gentoos and Magellanics provide an unrelenting background melody. And of course, it wouldn't be the Falklands without sheep. Along my hike, I also saw plenty of new bird species, most of which were not afraid of me at all. This beautiful long-tailed meadowlark came by to say hi. And this curious little dark-faced ground tyrant actually followed me for a while. And here's a juvenile skua. He may be cute, but mom will eventually teach him to steal penguin eggs and prey on chicks. As I walked past the first beach, I spotted some more Johnny Rooks. Also known as the striated caracara, these near-threatened birds of prey are only found in Argentina, Chile, and the Falkland Islands. With a world population of 1,000 breeding pairs, half live here. They are an opportunist species, feeding on everything from seabirds to stolen eggs and human food scraps. Occasionally, they even go after young lambs. In the late 90s, they became a protected species, as previously, farmers would kill them to protect their livestock. They are an incredibly smart bird with cognitive abilities that rival ravens and parrots. Don't be fooled though, they aren't nearly as friendly and will steal the hat off your head or your backpack if you leave it on the ground.
Gosh! Oh, you guys are a nuisance! What the heck? Get! Oh!
After narrowly avoiding becoming bird feed, I continued along the coast. Approximately 7 kilometers from the portakabin is where I finally found the southern giant petrels. The nests are out on a tidal island, so be careful if you venture out at low tide because you don't want to get stranded when the tide comes in. These fledglings are probably mere weeks away from taking off for the first time, but it'll be a while before they reach their adult size with a wingspan of 6 feet. I'm using my long lens here because breeding adults often abandon their nests if people approach too close. Notice that funny tubular structure on their bills? It's actually their nose. A small gland sits just above it that is responsible for excreting a concentrated salt solution from their blood. Think of it kind of like salty snot that helps them regulate their body's high sodium diet. I spent about an hour watching the adults repeatedly buzz the shoreline in search of food. About 2 kilometers further west, I reached Elephant Point, and as promised, I saw some elephant seals, just as rotund as ever, lounging along the shore. The marks they make in the sand are so unique it's hard to miss. Just look at that form. The way back was just as entertaining as the hike out. In the Falklands, and especially on Saunders Island, you're essentially never out of eyesight of an animal. As I crossed the isthmus, I spotted some Gentoos making their way down to the water for a drink. I also stopped for a drink and then began walking east to the Rockhopper colony, only about 10 minutes from camp. This was a much smaller colony than I was expecting, and unfortunately, again, no macaroni. However, these guys made up for it because they were super curious and came over to check me out. While I was up on the cliffs, I spotted this little Gentoo wandering out on his own for a swim. They may look awkward on land, but they are like missiles in the water. With the daylight fading, I made my way further along the cliff's edge towards where the Albatross colony supposedly was. After a while, I started to worry that I was too late, even though I knew that the nests weren't abandoned until May. Eventually, though, I heard the harsh cackles of a seabird I hadn't yet heard during my time in the Falklands. These are black-browed albatross. I had finally found one of the Falklands' 16 breeding sites. The Falklands is home to 85% of the world's population of these massive creatures. They breed in dense cliffside colonies and at up to 10 pounds with 8-foot wingspans and a lifespan of 70 years. It was truly a spectacular sight. Its Latin name is derived from the words melanus, meaning black, and ophrys, meaning eyebrows, which is clearly very fitting. The adults have a yellow-orange bill with a reddish tip. They mate for life and lay only a single egg every year. The juveniles have dark gray bills, and here you can see them practicing for their first flight. Once they fledge in a month's time, they fly north to Uruguay and won't return for a few years. They don't breed until around 7 years of age, and with such prolonged life cycles, their population is fragile. They are drawn towards the waste from fishing fleets, and many are killed on long-line fishing hooks. Unfortunately, the population has declined by almost 70% since the 1960s. Thankfully, though, heavy conservation efforts are underway, and this particular colony is absolutely thriving.
Oh, that was a full-on fish, I think.
And with that, my trip to Saunders Island had come to an end. And my time in the Falklands was nearing close. The sun was fading as I made my way back to camp, but there was just enough light left to capture some footage of these penguins for the last time. I couldn't have asked for a better way to mark an end to this unforgettable experience.
Unfortunately, my flight this morning is super early, so the plane is leaving at 9 a.m., which means that I had to be out of the neck before 8 a.m. It's luck of the draw with the FIGAS planes. You never know what time of day you're gonna have to fly out. I'd say that if you're planning on visiting any of the islands while you're in Falklands, Saunders is an absolute must. And if you're okay with a more rustic stay, you definitely need to choose the neck. All in all, super awesome trip to Saunders Island. Really excited about it. Kind of bummed that it's over, but so thankful for the experience and really excited for what's next.
I figured it'd be fitting to end my trip with an adventure back in Stanley where it all began.
If you're gonna visit the Falklands for any period of time and you're in Stanley for a few days, you definitely need to hike Mount Tumbledown. It's a really easy 5K round trip hike. It's one of the closest mountains, I suppose you could call it, just outside of Stanley, and you get beautiful views of the harbor, of Stanley itself. You can see Sapper Hill in the distance behind me there. And just in front of me on the other side of this peak here is Two Sisters, and then just to the north of that would be Mount Longdon. So really, really nice view, even though it's only about 250 meters above sea level.
To find the trailhead, get out of town and travel west along Ross Road. Take a left when you get to the end of the bay and follow the dirt road until it ends. Mount Tumbledown is a historically important site, as it's here where one of the final battles prior to the Argentinian surrender took place. There's even a film about a British officer who fought and was wounded here.
Just beware, even though the map is really well laid out, the trail itself, not so much. Now you can pretty much walk anywhere and you're not gonna get lost on account of there being no trees. Essentially plan on hiking through the grass and the diddle-dee and the moss and clambering over rocks because the trail is not very well marked.
Along the way, you'll find the remains of an Argentinian field kitchen. And after that, a short scramble up the rocks lands you on the summit. There's a cross erected here as a memorial to the soldiers who died in battle. You'll see beautiful views of the harbor and surrounding peaks on a clear day. After getting back into town, I realized my time in the Falklands was almost up. I had spent 6 weeks here, working and exploring, but we were now almost into April, and I started to come to terms with the fact that I just wasn't going to see that mysterious Macaroni penguin. But I guess that's life. We set ourselves goals and sometimes we don't quite succeed. If we only ever set goals we knew we could achieve, no one would make any progress. It's only by pushing our boundaries, reaching outside our comfort zone, that we can grow as humans and as photographers and videographers. And that's the important part, the process, not necessarily the goal. We may not achieve everything we set out to, but if we try, and I mean really try, give it our all, then what we experience along the way, that process, can deliver so much more than we ever expected. A year prior, I didn't even know the Falklands existed, and never in my life had I thought I might live here and get to see albatross feeding on a cliff's edge in the remote Antarctic. Feel the rumble of an elephant seal roar from 30 feet away. Or experience 2 little curious penguins who got so close I could see them breathe. But I really wanted to find that freaking penguin. I got a tip yesterday that there's one living amongst the Rockhopper colony out at Murrell Farm. So I gave the landowner a call and confirmed that the Macaroni was in fact at the colony yesterday. It's done molting, meaning that it could leave for sea any day now. So I asked if they would be willing to give me a ride out today, and they agreed. My camera has intermittently been giving me a lot of issues. People that use Canon, you might know error 20, but if I give it a good smack, it'll work for a few minutes. So I've borrowed a friend's vehicle, I've packed my failing camera, and if I can get there before 3:30 today, they've agreed to drive me overland about an hour to Berkeley Sound where the Rockhopper colony is, so that hopefully I can finally capture footage of the elusive Macaroni penguin. Okay, here we go.
You got the 4.
Yep, I did. I got all 4 types, yep.
Oh my gosh.
We found it! Thank you so much for watching. Comment below on your favorite animal. If you're like me and you want to see these animals continue to thrive, you can join the conservation effort by adopting a penguin. Visit the Falklands Conservation for more details, link in the description. And if you liked this video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more awesome travel content. It'll help me out and motivate me to make more videos just like this.